The sun was just beginning to dip, painting the sky in gold, when Marcus Hale rolled up to his mansion's private gate. But before he could enter, flashing lights and raised voices cut through the calm. Within minutes, the encounter would spiral into a moment no one saw coming. Marcus Hale's Bentley purred like a satisfied predator as it curved around the last bend of the winding, tree-lined road. His mind was still running through numbers, profit margins, investment returns, the deals he'd closed that afternoon in New York, when the familiar iron gates of his estate came into view. They stood at the edge of 5 rolling acres, a black lattice of strength and elegance, the sort of gates that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. The summer air was warm, heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to imagine an evening of peace. But peace would not come. 2 police cruisers were angled across the entrance like steel barricades, red and blue lights spinning into the dusk. The gates themselves were shut tight, and in the gap between their bars stood 3 officers, each with the stance of someone convinced they were exactly where they belonged. Marcus slowed the car to a crawl, his brow tightening. In all the years he'd lived here, 7 to be exact, he'd never once seen a police presence on his property without invitation. He stopped the Bentley just short of the first cruiser, lowered the driver's side window, and let the hum of the engine fade into the low growl of cicadas in the trees. The tallest of the officers, a lean man with sun-leathered skin and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone, took a step forward. His mirrored sunglasses caught the dying light, turning the sunset into shards of gold on his face. "Evenin'," he said, his voice carrying a practiced authority. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" Marcus tilted his head, studying the man for a heartbeat longer than politeness dictated. "Home," he said simply, his baritone calm but threaded with steel. The officer's gaze flicked to the car, then back to Marcus's face, lingering as though trying to assemble a puzzle that refused to make sense. "And where's that exactly?" Marcus's eyes shifted toward the gate just behind the man. "You're standing in front of it." The shorter officer, a sandy-haired man with restless eyes, snorted under his breath. "Sir, this is private property. We can't just let anyone in." Marcus's patience thinned by a fraction. "It's not anyone. It's me. My name is Marcus Hale. I own this property. I live here." The tall officer's lips twitched, though not in a smile. "Got any proof of that?" The question landed like an insult wrapped in civility. Marcus kept his expression neutral, though a slow, almost imperceptible breath eased from his chest. "My car is registered here. My license lists this address. The security cameras," he pointed subtly toward the gate's black posts where lenses watched silently, "already have my face and yours on record. If that's not enough, I can call my head of security. He'll be here in 60 seconds. Instead of stepping aside, the officers exchanged glances. The sandy-haired one shifted his stance, crossing his arms. "Funny thing, Mr. Hale. If that's who you are, we had a report of suspicious activity in the area. Big house like this. Sometimes we gotta make sure folks belong where they say they do." Marcus leaned an elbow against the edge of his open window, letting the silence stretch for a beat too long. "Suspicious activity?" he repeated softly. "I'd be very interested to hear what about me, driving my own car on my own road. Set off your suspicion." The third officer, who had been leaning casually against the cruiser, finally spoke. His voice was younger, less certain. "Look, sir, it's probably just a misunderstanding. If you have ID, we can clear this up quick." Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, not because he feared the movement, but because he had learned long ago that fast motions around certain kinds of men carried risks. He passed over his driver's license, watching the tall officer glance at it, glance back at him and then back at the license as though trying to reconcile 2 incompatible truths. "You're telling me," the tall one said finally, "that you live here." "I'm not telling you," Marcus interrupted, his voice now cold glass. "I'm stating a fact you could confirm in under 30 seconds if you wanted to." The sandy-haired officer muttered something to his partner that Marcus couldn't quite catch. The younger officer's eyes darted toward the security cameras, then toward the horizon as if wishing himself elsewhere. A faint breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Somewhere deeper on the property, Marcus knew, his staff was preparing for his arrival. The front lights would be on, the kitchen alive with quiet movement. And here he was, stalled at his own gates by men who had decided his skin and his car did not match the neighborhood they served. Marcus could have ended it right there. He could have called his private security detail, who would arrive in black SUVs and settle the matter in seconds. He could have called the mayor, an old golf partner, or the chief of police himself, both of whom had his number. But there was a part of him, deep and deliberate, that wanted to let this play out. Not because he enjoyed the disrespect, but because sometimes the truth needed space to show itself in full daylight. The tall officer handed back the license without looking directly at Marcus. "Gonna need to run this through our system, just a formality." Marcus took the license back, sliding it into his wallet. "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," the sandy-haired officer said, "you can wait right here." Marcus's lips curved, not in humor, but in something quieter, sharper. "Gentlemen," he said, shifting the Bentley into park, "you've made a choice tonight. I hope you're ready for where it leads." The younger officer swallowed hard and Marcus caught it. The tall one didn't flinch. The lights from the cruisers painted the Bentley in pulses of red and blue, turning the polished chrome into flickers of fire and ice. The gate loomed just behind them, still closed, but in Marcus's mind, the image was already forming. This moment, frozen in time. The officers standing exactly where they shouldn't, unaware they were seconds away from unraveling their own careers. And Marcus Hale, patient, calculating Marcus Hale, wouldn't need to raise his voice to make it happen. The air between the Bentley and the police cruisers grew thicker by the minute, the kind of heaviness that pressed on the skin and made the smallest sound ring sharp. Marcus rested his hand lightly on the steering wheel, his posture still as a marble statue. He wasn't just waiting, he was measuring them, noting every shift in tone, every micro-expression. Years in business had taught him that the real story often lived in the smallest cracks of composure. Through the windshield, he saw the sandy-haired officer walk back toward one of the cruisers, license in hand. The tall one remained, his hands planted on his hips, eyes still hidden behind those reflective lenses. "You from around here?" the tall officer asked casually, as though they were two strangers passing the time. Marcus's gaze didn't waver. "I live on the other side of that gate. I've already told you that." The officer's head tilted slightly, like he'd caught a faint sound in the distance. "Big place like that? Must take a lot to keep it running. How long you been there?" Marcus heard the subtext. The question wasn't about time, it was about legitimacy. 7 years, he said evenly. Bought it from the Brenton family when they moved overseas. The officer said nothing, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth told Marcus that the name had registered. Everyone in this county knew the Brentons. Old money, white, the kind of family whose surname was printed on park benches and hospital wings. And now, their former estate belonged to a man the officer clearly hadn't expected to see behind the wheel of a Bentley. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw movement on the long driveway behind the gates. A dark SUV was gliding forward, one of his security vehicles, tinted windows reflecting the last orange edge of daylight. It stopped just inside the gate, and the driver's door opened. Darius Cole stepped out. 6'3", broad-shouldered, with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent 15 years in military special operations before taking on private security work, Darius carried himself like a loaded weapon. His black suit was pressed sharp enough to cut glass, his earpiece catching a glint of red from the cruiser lights. "Evening, officers," Darius said, voice low and controlled as he approached the gate from inside the property. "Problem here?" The tall officer shifted his stance but didn't back up. "Just doing our job. Got a call about suspicious activity. Need to verify this man belongs here." "This man," Darius said, stepping closer, "is Marcus Hale. He doesn't just belong here. He owns this property, the land it sits on, and the road you're parked on. You're trespassing." The sandy-haired officer returned from the cruiser, holding Marcus's license. "Dispatch says it checks out. Address matches, no warrants, nothing unusual." "Good," Darius said, his eyes locked on the tall officer. "Then you can open the gate and get off our property." The tall officer didn't move. "Like I said, we got a call. Until we're satisfied—" "You are satisfied," Darius cut in. his voice like a door slamming shut. "You've confirmed his identity. That should have taken 30 seconds, not 10 minutes. So either you're leaving, or I'm calling the chief. And believe me, he will answer." Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent now, something that made the younger officer's eyes flick toward him nervously. "Darius," he said, "hold off on the chief for now. Let's give them a little more rope." The tall officer's head turned just slightly, as if sensing the shift but not understanding it. Another SUV rolled up behind Darius's inside the gate. This one bore the subtle, custom-etched crest of Hale Enterprises, a symbol recognized in boardrooms from New York to Singapore. 2 more security personnel stepped out, taking up quiet positions by the fence line, hands clasped loosely in front of them. From somewhere deep inside the estate, the faint bark of a dog carried on the air. The sound was followed by a sharp whistle, and the barking ceased instantly. Even that, Marcus knew, told the officers something. This was a property run with precision. The sandy-haired officer took a half-step back toward his cruiser. "Look, we didn't mean any disrespect." "Disrespect," Marcus said, finally leaning forward in his seat, "isn't the problem here. The problem is presumption. You presumed I didn't belong because I didn't fit your picture of who owns a place like this. That's not policing, that's profiling." The tall officer's jaw shifted, a muscle ticking there. "Sir, you're making this into something it's not." Marcus smiled faintly. "Am I?" Behind him, a third vehicle approached from the road. This one wasn't part of his security detail. It was black, sleek, and unmistakable. As it drew closer, Marcus saw the state seal glinting on the license plate. The car eased to a stop behind the Bentley, and out stepped a man in a navy suit, tie loosened at the collar. "Marcus," the man said warmly, walking forward with the relaxed ease of an old friend. "Didn't expect to see you stuck out here." The younger officer straightened slightly. The tall one hesitated. "We received a call," the sandy-haired officer began, "about possible trespassing." Ramirez's gaze flicked to Marcus, then back to the officers. "On his own property? That's what we're verifying," the tall one said, but his voice lacked the certainty it had held minutes before. Ramirez stepped closer, her eyes locking on the tall officer. "You've had his ID for how long now?" "Couple minutes," the younger officer muttered. "And you've run it?" A pause. Ramirez's tone sharpened. "You haven't run it." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus didn't move, but inside, he felt the air shifting. The moment of reckoning was inching closer. "Here's what's going to happen," Ramirez continued. "You're going to step aside, open the gate, and allow Mr. Hale to enter his property. Then you're going to provide your names, badge numbers, and a copy of the incident report you'll be filing, because there will be one." The sandy-haired officer's mouth tightened. "We're just doing our jobs." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You're doing something else entirely, and in about 20 minutes you're going to wish you hadn't." Lightning flashed far off in the sky, illuminating the scene for a split second. The gleam of the Bentley, the black gates, the stone faces of the officers, and Marcus Hale, sitting in the middle of it all like a man who had already decided how this story would end. The gates stood as silent witnesses to the unraveling. Marcus could feel the shift in the air, like the pause before a conductor's baton drops. The thunder was closer now, the wind carrying the faint metallic scent of rain, and in that suspended moment, he decided the game was over. Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, drawing out his phone. The tall officer's posture stiffened. "No need for that, sir," he said. "Oh, there's every need for it," Marcus replied, his voice quiet enough that the words carried more weight than if he had shouted. His thumb moved with the precision of a man who had made this call before. The line clicked. "Graham," Marcus said when the voice answered, "how's the gala prep going?" He didn't wait for the answer. "Good. I'm at my front gate, and I've got 3 officers blocking my entrance. They've detained me without cause, ignored proof of ownership, and are wasting everyone's time. Yes, do it now." He ended the call without another word. The tall officer frowned. "Who was that?" "You'll find out," Marcus said, slipping the phone back into his jacket. Behind him, the second SUV's driver had gotten out and was now leaning against the hood, arms crossed, watching like a man enjoying the final act of a show he'd already seen 100 times. 2 minutes later, the first sign came, a distant wail of sirens, but not from police cruisers. The sound grew louder until a sleek, unmarked black sedan pulled up behind the SUV. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out in a midnight blue suit, his polished shoes catching the dying light. "Evening, Marcus," the man said, his tone warm but clipped, the way professionals spoke when time was money. "Evening, Victor," Marcus replied. The man turned to the officers. "I'm Victor Graham. I represent the city's Office of Police Accountability. I've just received a direct complaint from Mr. Hale. Your current behavior is now part of an active investigation. You will comply with his request immediately." The younger officer shifted uneasily. "Sir, we—" "Save it," Graham said, cutting him off without looking at him. "You've already been recorded from the moment you arrived. Every word, every refusal, every minute you kept him from his property. It's all on video. This will go to the mayor's desk by morning." The sandy-haired officer's jaw tightened, his earlier bravado evaporating. The tall officer still tried to hold ground. "We had a call. We were just doing our job." Graham stepped closer, his voice low and pointed. "Your job is to enforce the law, not invent reasons to detain homeowners who don't fit your personal picture of the neighborhood. You've crossed the line from procedure into profiling, and the consequences for that in this city are severe." Ramirez, still by the gate, spoke up. "Open it." The younger officer, without meeting anyone's eyes, reached for the control panel. The gates began to swing inward with a slow, smooth motion. The Bentley's headlights washed over the stone driveway beyond, the path home finally unobstructed. But Marcus didn't move the car. Instead, he opened the door and stepped out, the evening air cool against the fine weave of his tailored suit. He walked toward the officers, each step measured, his polished shoes clicking softly against the asphalt. "You've all made a choice tonight," Marcus said, his voice even. "You didn't just stop a car, you stopped me. And in doing that, you stopped the wrong man." The tall officer started to speak, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him without effort. "In the next 24 hours, Marcus continued, your shift assignments will change. Your supervisors will call you in for a conversation you won't enjoy. Your badges will be turned in before the week is over. Not because I want vengeance, but because you've shown you can't tell the difference between law enforcement and prejudice. And in this city, that ends careers." The younger officer's throat bobbed in a swallow. The sandy-haired one's eyes darted toward the ground. Victor Graham spoke again, pulling a folded set of documents from his case. "By order of the Police Accountability Commission, all 3 of you are relieved of duty effective immediately, pending termination review. Hand over your weapons and badges." The shock on their faces was almost audible. "You can't do that," the tall officer snapped, though his voice wavered. "We just did," Graham replied. One by one, the officers removed their service weapons and badges, placing them on the hood of the nearest cruiser. The metallic clinks sounded like gavel strikes in the cooling night air. Marcus didn't smile. He didn't need to. He simply turned, walked back to his Bentley, and slid into the driver's seat. Daniel moved to open the gate wider, Ramirez stepped aside, and Graham closed his case with a decisive snap. As the Bentley rolled forward, Marcus glanced once in the rearview mirror. The 3 officers stood there, stripped of their symbols of power, their cruisers still flashing useless light into the night. Inside the mansion, the staff had already begun preparing dinner. Crystal glasses waited on the dining table, wine breathing in decanters, and the quiet hum of the home wrapped around Marcus like armor. But before stepping inside, he paused in the doorway and looked back at the long driveway, the gates now closed again. Somewhere out there, 3 careers had just ended in less than 30 minutes, not with gunfire or shouting, but with calm, deliberate precision. Marcus allowed himself the faintest breath of satisfaction, and then he went inside, leaving the storm to break without him. In a world full of noise, we follow the quiet truth stories that reveal, awaken, and transform. If this story moved you, like, comment, and subscribe for more untold narratives that challenge perception and stir the soul. Hit the bell so you never miss when the compass points us to the next hidden truth. This is Hidden Compass Stories, where every story leads somewhere deeper.